Welcome to the section on scientific research, finding participants, and an introduction to ethical considerations. Now let's talk about our participants. How do we find them? How do we find participants and what are the rules? Now we'll talk about research involving human participants. Any experiment involving the participation of human subjects is governed by extensive, strict guidelines that are designed to ensure that the experiment does not result in harm. Any research institution that receives federal support for research involving human participants must have access to an Institutional Review Board, or IRB. The IRB is a committee of individuals often made up of members of the institution's administration, scientists, and community members. The purpose of the IRB is to review research proposals that involve human participants. The IRB reviews these proposals with the principles mentioned above in mind, and generally, approval from the IRB is required for the experiment to proceed. Each participant must sign an informed consent form before they can participate in the experiment. An informed consent form provides a written description of what participants can expect during the experiment, including potential risks and implications of the research. It also lets participants know that their involvement is completely voluntary and can be discontinued without penalty at any time. Furthermore, the informed consent guarantees that any data collected in the experiment will remain completely confidential. In cases where research participants are under the age of 18, the parents or legal guardians are required to sign the informed consent form. Here's an example of what an informed consent page or document might look like for an electronic survey. So here it shows the name of the survey, the purpose of the survey, and how long participation should take. It also talks about risks being very minimal, but it does identify that because the survey is online, there is a small risk of it not being anonymous because it's online. So there's always some risk. It does mention that data will be de-identified, so no one will know what IP address things came from or anything like that. It also talks about what will happen with the results. What will they be used for? It says the results may be published in a scientific research journal or presented at a professional conference. However, it does identify a second time that no names or identities will be revealed and everything will remain anonymous. All data also will be secured in a password protected account, and individual responses will be merged with other participants for analysis. This form also identifies that there is no actual direct benefit to people who participate in the study, but that their participation may benefit others by helping to identify best practices in this subject area. It also says that participants can choose not to participate or to stop participating and withdraw at any time with no penalty. Additionally, at the bottom, it does give contact information for any participants who might have additional questions about the survey, the data, the experiment, or any of that involving their participation. Sometimes deception is necessary to prevent participants' knowledge of the exact research question from affecting the result of the study. Deception involves purposely misleading experiment participants in order to maintain the integrity of the experiment, but not to the point where the deception could be considered harmful. For example, if we are interested in how our opinion of someone is affected by their attire, we might use deception in describing the experiment to prevent that knowledge from affecting participants' responses. In cases where deception is involved, participants must receive full debriefings upon conclusion of the study, complete, honest information about the purpose of the experiment, how that data that was collected will be used, and the reasons why deception was necessary, also including information about how to obtain additional information about the study. Considering all of the rules we have now and how careful we need to be with people's safety and with our research designs, let's talk about why all these rules are in place and what happened in the past that caused us to have these very, very formal regulations to make sure that in every instance, people are as protected as possible. Now let's talk a little bit about ethics and where we went very, very wrong in the past. This conversation is difficult. This information is ugly, but I think it's very necessary to discuss so that we understand why all of the rules we have now are in place and just how important they are so that nothing goes wrong today in modern research. Let's discuss the Tuskegee syphilis study. Unfortunately, the ethical guidelines that exist now for research today were not always applied in the past. In 1932, poor rural black male sharecroppers from Tuskegee, Alabama, were recruited to participate in an experiment conducted by the U.S. Public Health Service with the aim of studying syphilis in black men. In exchange for free medical care, meals, and burial insurance, 600 men agreed to participate in the study. A little more than half of these men tested positive for syphilis, and they served as the experimental group. Given that the researchers could not randomly assign participants to groups, this would be a quasi-experiment. In a regular experiment, we might take in 600 people and assign one to a condition, like one group to a condition, and another group to not have the condition. But in this instance, there was no control over who had it or who didn't when they came into the study. So they split the group according to people who were positive and people who were not. So that's why it's called a quasi-experiment versus a traditional experiment. So the remaining syphilis-free individuals served as the control group in this instance. However, the individuals that tested positive for syphilis were never informed that they had the disease. So while there was no treatment for syphilis when the study began, by 1947, penicillin was recognized as a very effective treatment for the disease. Despite this, no penicillin was administered to the participants in this study, and the participants were not allowed to seek treatment at any other facility if they wanted to continue in the study. Over the course of 40 years, many of the participants unknowingly spread syphilis to their wives and subsequently their children that were born from their wives, and eventually died because they didn't receive treatment for the disease. This study was discontinued in 1972 when the experiment was discovered by the national press. The resulting outrage over this experiment led directly to the National Research Act of 1974 and the strict ethical guidelines for research on humans. After the Tuskegee syphilis study was exposed in 1972, the participants were finally given medical treatment, and the government established the Tuskegee Health Benefit Program to provide ongoing health care to the study subjects and their families, including treatment for syphilis that was previously withheld throughout the study. That being said, nothing about this study was okay. Nothing about it was ethical. Not okay. But here is a video that will be linked below that talks about some personal reflections of people that were involved in the study. History, attitudes, cultural beliefs, social issues, and investigator behavior continue to affect minority enrollment in medical research studies. From January 1998 to March 1999, 179 Black and white residents of the Detroit primary metropolitan statistical area participated in a mail and telephone survey designed to examine impediments to Black Americans' participation in medical research studies. 81% of Black Americans and 28% of white Americans had knowledge of the Tuskegee study. Knowledge of the study resulted in less trust of researchers for 51% of Black Americans and 17% of white Americans. 46% of Black Americans and 34% of white Americans indicated that their knowledge of the study would affect future research participation decisions. Of these, 49% of Black Americans and 17% of white Americans would not be willing to participate in future medical research studies. Medical researchers need to continue to confront the issues caused by the Tuskegee study and its continuing impact on Black Americans' trust of medical research studies. Now let's move on to discuss research involving animal subjects. Many psychologists conduct research involving animals. Often, these researchers use rodents or birds as the subjects of their experiments. The APA estimates that 90% of all animal research in psychology uses these species. Because many basic processes in animals are similar to those in humans, these animals are acceptable substitutes for research that would be considered unethical in human participants. However, humane and ethical treatment of animal research subjects is a critical aspect of this type of research. Researchers must design their experiments to minimize any pain or distress experienced by animals that are serving as research subjects. Whereas IRBs review research proposals that involve human participants, animal experimental proposals are reviewed by an institutional animal care and use committee. This committee consists of institutional administrators, scientists, veterinarians, and community members. This committee is charged with ensuring that all experimental proposals require the humane treatment of animal research subjects. It also conducts semi-annual inspections of all animal facilities to ensure that the research protocols are being followed. No animal research project can proceed without the committee's approval. Now let's discuss finding participants. Some of the ways that we find participants for studies include using social media or other internet platforms for surveys, either to distribute those surveys or to recruit participants. We also collaborate with groups or organizations that could be related to our topic. We use existing networks and contacts. We can use advertisements like local newspapers or other publications, community bulletin boards, or online classified ads. These ads typically outline the purpose of the study, the eligibility criteria, and the benefits of participation, if there are any. Recruitment can also happen through public events like conferences or seminars. Snowball sampling is another method that can gather participants. This is where someone participates and then asks their friends or colleagues to participate as well. Additionally, we can go through professional agencies to get participants. Convenience sampling is a sampling method where participants are selected based on their availability and willingness to take part in the study. This method is often used in preliminary research phases or as a supplement to other sampling methods. Researchers choose participants who are easy to reach, such as students on a campus, customers in a store, or people who are active on social media channels. Advantages to convenient sampling include that it is simple and quick. It also allows researchers to quickly gather their data without extensive planning or resources. Disadvantages include that it can lead to selecting participants that are skewed toward a specific group. Researchers should carefully consider the scope of participants needed to answer their research question effectively. And if a set of participants with different characteristics are needed, then researchers can also use other recruitment methods to ensure they are collecting a useful and relevant set of data. Snowball sampling, as we mentioned earlier, is recruiting eligible participants through referrals from previous participants. Advantages include it's effective for reaching hard to access or hidden populations, such as individuals with rare diseases, members of stigmatized communities, or people with specific expertise. These populations are difficult to contact, let alone recruit, particularly if they are naturally reticent to volunteer thoughts to be shared with a scholarly audience. Disadvantages include that relying on participant referrals can limit the researcher's control over the sampling process. It's also important to find the right participants who fall within the scope of the research, and researchers might want to collect data from participants who do not share the same views or personal interest in the topic that's being studied. Confidentiality is another factor when recruiting participants. We must make sure that we're protecting the privacy and confidentiality of participants. This is a critical ethical consideration. Researchers must take steps to ensure that personal information is kept secure and that participants' identities are protected. This involves using data anonymously, so securing that data storage and limiting access to data to authorized personnel only. Participants need to be informed about how their data will be used, stored, and shared. They should also be made aware of any measures in place to protect their confidentiality. For example, researchers might use pseudonyms or codes to identify participants instead of using their real names. Data should be stored in secure encrypted formats, and access should be restricted to individuals directly involved with the research.